My name's Lara Dungan, and I've spent 10 years of my life studying diseases, medicine, and health. Medical advancements in my lifetime have been astronomical. We're certainly living longer, and many of the diseases which killed our parents' generation only 30 years ago are no longer the same threat to us today. But are we living healthier? Hey guys!
Hi!
In my introduction to EcoEye, I want to take you on a journey to explore how environmental factors affect not just how long we live, but how healthy we are throughout those years. I study medicine, and in the medical world, we very often find ourselves treating diseases once they've developed, rather than working to prevent them. And the more I discover about the environment we live in, the more concerned I am for the future of our health system. Globally, environmental pollutants are responsible for as many as 13 million deaths per year. So I've decided to take a look at 3 different environmental issues that affect our health: the air we breathe, the chemicals we're exposed to, and the spaces we live in. So let's start with air pollution. You may think these problems don't affect us. We're a tiny island on the edge of Europe with a reputation for lush green fields and clean Atlantic air. Yet air pollution alone is estimated to cost our healthcare system a staggering €2 billion every year. So where is all this pollution coming from? And how is it affecting our health? Let's go and see. I have to admit, I'm totally shocked to discover that there are now 1 billion cars in the world. Just imagine that, 1 billion exhausts spewing noxious fumes into the air we breathe. But what I didn't know was just how much of a role air pollution plays in conditions such as lung cancer and even heart disease. In fact, right now, air pollution is the largest single environmental health risk in the world.
Volkswagen has announced that it stopped the sale in the EU of new cars with the software that can cheat diesel emissions tests. Meanwhile, the managing director of Volkswagen Ireland...
A great deal of attention has been put on major car manufacturers cheating on their emissions tests, but very little focus on what these pollutants are actually doing to our health. Transport accounts for 30 to 40% of our air pollution, so with the help of Trinity College's engineering department, we've devised a test to get an idea of how different types of commuters are exposed to pollutants. Oh, perfect timing. Here comes our cyclist now.
Hi, Lara.
Hi, Duncan. How are you? Good to meet you. This is Ronan.
Duncan, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
You're an
We go up and
engineer.
we get
I'm an
on the
engineer
walker
in
as
Trinity
well.
College, I am.
Very good.
My sister Amber's going to walk her usual route into town with her little boy. And Duncan and I, we're going to take the exact same route. Duncan on his bike, while I'll be in the car with my niece and Ronan, our engineer.
Okay, so in this enclosure, we've got the optical particle counter. So this inlet here is taking air into the optical particle counter and measuring the concentration of particles in the air inside the backpack.
Bye. Bye.
You're just going to take the same route as the girls, so you're going to cycle from here to Trinity, and when you get there, I'll meet you and I'll take the SD card and I'll be able to load up the data.
Great, Ronan.
Thank you.
And don't pollute me too much on the way in, please.
I'll try and avoid you, Duncan. You're looking good, though.
Thanks, Lara. Great stuff.
All right, good luck. Be safe. The biomonitoring box we're all wearing will measure some of the particulate matter and air-polluting gases along our route. But the rate at which we breathe in those elements is also going to differ. Both our cyclist and our walker will be breathing at a more elevated rate than I am, just sitting behind the wheel. A once-off car journey without much traffic isn't a true reflection of how exposed an average motor commuter is. But I'm still interested that technology like this could help us commuters understand the threats we're facing in our daily commutes. So who's this then? This is my sister, is it?
Amber, yeah.
So the red is obviously the bad.
Red is bad.
And the green is good. Okay, great. Each peak, how long is that measuring for?
So each one of those is a 2-second interval.
Okay, so it's really specific to exactly where she was at the time.
Right,
so she obviously just left and went through this little park. And you can see it's gone all green. You can see it's gone way down there. And then I know this is where she jumped back up onto the road again from the park. So you can see the entire journey as it goes in. And here again, you can see each place that she's walked in away from it.
From your perspective as the car driver, unusually today, you had the lowest exposure. Duncan on the bicycle was just about in second place, and your sister, unfortunately, had the highest exposure.
Angus explained that my sister's journey had the highest exposure because of the amount of time she spent walking close to the roadside. Data from other longer studies have shown that drivers' exposure can be much higher at peak traffic times. I mean, you had these filters on us and we were pulling in all the air, but what were you looking at? What were you actually assessing?
Particulate matter. So this is this very small, it's not dust, but you can imagine it as dust. That is linked to heart attacks. As PM 2.5 goes up, hospital admissions for heart attacks also go up, so there's a strong link proven between the two.
What can I do as an individual to try and reduce that?
So you can try and reduce your exposure. Let's say if we took Duncan for this morning, he could try and cycle a greener route, avoiding busy roads, going through parks and so on. Similarly, your sister could try and do the same thing. Further away you are from the source, the lower your exposure would be. Travelling less by fossil fuel powered vehicles will obviously reduce the exposure of everybody collectively.
So by choosing to take the car today, I'm polluting both myself and the pedestrians and cyclists around me. Dr. Brian Broderick is interested in solutions to this personal exposure of commuters to air pollution in the urban environment.
The types of pollution that we're most interested in or most worried about are particulates, which are very small pieces of solid or liquid matter in the atmosphere, and then gases that wouldn't naturally occur in the atmosphere, such as nitrogen dioxide is another pollutant that we're interested in because it tends to have high concentrations in urban centres. In terms of road vehicles, the main source of particulate pollution is from diesel engines, and especially diesel engines on large vehicles. And again, in Dublin city centre, that might mean heavy goods vehicles that are transporting goods around the city centre or through the city centre, but also buses, which although they're good from a public transport point of view and reduce the total number of vehicles on the road, because they run with diesel engines, are necessarily going to be emitting quite a lot of particulate matter into the atmosphere as well.
Why is it bad? What's it doing to me?
If we've short-term elevated concentrations of air pollution episodes, that can have adverse effects in terms of respiratory illness. And people who suffer from asthma or elderly people who have weaker respiratory systems, they can be adversely affected, especially when the weather conditions are particularly bad. And then over a long-term basis, a number of air pollutants such as particulates and benzene, which are found in motor vehicle exhausts, they're known to be carcinogens. So people who are exposed to those pollutants over a long period of time can expect that their cancer risk will increase. So throughout Europe, we have standard limit values. But the standard value, we say that in Europe as a whole, life expectancy is reduced by 8 months due to the effects of air pollution. So that's even when we're meeting current standards.
What's the future of this hold for us?
If we want to be serious about reducing the contribution that road transport makes to poor air quality, then we have to reduce the number of vehicles on our roads and to use them less, and to use vehicles that have better emission controls technology and better emissions technology so that they produce less pollution.
But it's not just traffic pollution in big cities that's affecting our health. Recent studies have shown that in Ireland, over 1,000 deaths per year are caused by air pollution from home heating fuels. In fact, the worst air quality in Ireland is actually in our smaller towns. I'm travelling to Enniscorthy to find out why our small towns have such poor air quality.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing in a lot of small towns around the country where they're dependent on solid fuel for home heating is that the air quality, particularly in the evening, can be quite bad when people start lighting fires, and the level of these particles and other pollutants actually increases quite a bit. A lot of people still have open fires. Open fires are a very inefficient way of heating your home, probably about 30% efficient in terms of the heat that you're getting. So it's not really an appropriate way to heat your home in this day and age. People need to look at what they're burning, how they're burning it, and how they can actually reduce the impact on their local community. Well, in the late 80s, there was very bad episodes of smog in Dublin, and there was actually quite a lot of deaths caused by the smoke levels in Dublin. So in 1990, a ban was introduced on bituminous or smoky coal in Dublin to try and reduce the levels of smoke and particles in the atmosphere.
In the 90s, this ban was only enforced in our bigger cities. In fact, even now, it's still legal to burn smoking coal in towns with a population under 15,000. But all this is about to change, with a total countrywide ban coming into effect later this year. And what kind of measurements are you seeing here in Enniscorthy?
We're seeing fairly high measurements, and this is typical of a lot of smaller towns around the country where we're actually seeing levels that are often higher than we measure in Dublin, predominantly because of the way that people are heating their homes in these areas.
And are we hoping then when they bring in the smoky coal ban later in the year, it's going to make a difference?
Unfortunately, it's not that easy because we know that other fuels that people might switch to, for example, peat or wood, actually have the same level of emissions as coal. So even in Enniscorthy here, where we're looking at, we see that EPA monitoring here has shown that the particle levels are actually relatively high. And the biggest source of those is from home heating at the moment, and not just coal, but also peat and wood burning. So again, if people just make a choice and they switch from smoky coal to peat, we won't see any impact at all.
And can you tell me a bit then about how this exposure is going to affect us in the long term?
Yeah, well, some of the impacts of these particles are things like asthma, and it can also result in respiratory and cardiovascular disease. Even things like stroke and angina can be brought on by these particles, particularly in sensitive members of the population like children or older people.
And is this fixable? What can we do to make it better here? Can we take individual responsibility?
Because so many of these particles are from home heating, in fact, people can make a significant difference if they choose the right fuels and if they choose the best way to heat their home. And they can look at renewable options like solar heating or heat pumps, for example, where you're not using any fossil fuels at all. And, you can heat your homes and you can get grants for all of these things. So I think it is something that people should look into.
In truth, there is no safe level of air pollution. Any exposure to it lowers life expectancy. Research has shown that if we reduced our pollution from domestic fuel burning by 40%, this would save more than 500 lives every year. But air pollution isn't the only environmental issue affecting our health. One of the most alarming health issues to emerge in recent years is the effects of our exposure to man-made chemicals. In 2014, a landmark study by the World Health Organization linked endocrine or hormone-disrupting chemicals to numerous diseases and disorders such as breast and prostate cancer, IQ loss, genital malformation, and obesity. Today, we're exposed to more than 1,000 of these endocrine-disrupting chemicals in our food packaging and other household and cosmetic products. I'm on my way to the University of Ulster to meet Professor Vivian Howard, a world expert in research on biologically active chemicals, and to find out how they affect our hormonal system.
The number of synthetic chemicals that are being produced in the last 100 years is quite enormous. And these include plastics and pharmaceuticals and agrochemicals and many, many things. Many of these chemicals are actually able to mimic natural chemicals in our body, such as hormones, and interfere with their processes.
And so then how are these chemicals getting into us? How am I ingesting these chemicals?
Well, you'll certainly get some in food, but also cleaning agents, toothpastes, cosmetics, they can all contain such substances which are capable of endocrine disruption.
And Vivian, how are these chemicals affecting us?
So let's just take one example, breast cancer in women. In the 1960s, there was a 1 in 20 chance of developing breast cancer during a lifetime. The latest figures are 1 in 8. So we think there that there's very, very low dose exposure in fetal period can lead to structural changes in the breast. Well, it can. We've seen that in animal models. And we think that that is something which predisposes you to develop cancer later in life. Let's talk about obesity. There's an epidemic of obesity, and a number of endocrine disrupting chemicals have been shown to affect a particular receptor in cells. So what we think is happening is that low-dose exposure to quite a number of different chemicals can switch on this receptor and lead to an increased number of potential fat cells in the body.
But Vivian, surely the levels that we are actually exposed to in our day-to-day lives, are they not a bit too low to actually cause these diseases?
Well, the level at which your hormones work in your body, physiologically, is in parts per trillion. It's very, very low dose. We know that some of the bad actors are pesticides, and so there is food available which is grown without pesticides, and it's called organic food. It costs more, but it can be a lifestyle decision if you're particularly a woman who's thinking of starting a family. It can be a lifestyle decision to actually go for foods which are produced organically, for example.
Yeah, okay, we can change to organic products and we can take food that doesn't have pesticides on it, but then what if it's being packaged into, say, cans that are filled with these chemicals or plastics?
Right, well, tin cans can be a problem. About half of them are lined with a lacquer, which is made from polycarbonate, so that's bisphenol A. So that, yes, that's been shown that they can leach from there. And because these changes are functional and subtle, nobody picks up on it. So if there were dead bodies in the street, of course, there would be instant action to counteract it. I think the bottom line to give advice to people, if you want to avoid taking in many of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, is to use natural products.
Honestly, these chemicals, these endocrine disrupting chemicals, are everywhere. They're in everything and they seem impossible to avoid. What Vivian did say is that we can make practical choices, so we could go organic with our food, we can stop using certain cleaning products. But these are the ones we know about. What about the ones that we don't know about? Look, this one has the decency to say, yeah, it doesn't contain dangerous chemicals. This one, I have absolutely no ideas. The food packaging, you can read the ingredients fine, but if I'm going to microwave it in this plastic container, then I'm going to be exposing myself to all sorts of chemicals. Even the water that we're drinking, there's chemicals in all of this plastic. Look at this, look at all these little bits of plastic inside here. Women apply about 168 different chemicals every single day to their bodies. And I don't think any of us know what it's doing or the effect of any of it in the long term. Exposure to chemicals in our environment is costing Ireland over €5 billion a year in associated health costs. That's not to mention the human cost. We need our governments to protect us and impose tighter restrictions on these chemicals. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are also contributing to the epidemic of obesity, which is one of the largest health concerns in Ireland. But it's not just chemicals that are the only problem. In fact, the most significant contributing factor to obesity is actually other environmental factors that we often don't consider. I'm meeting Professor Donal O'Shea, Ireland's leading expert on obesity, to find out what role our environment plays in this growing problem.
50 years ago, we were the lightest country in Europe. In the 1980s, we'd caught up and we were about normal, but we have just continued on that upward trajectory because the environment of high fat, high salt, high sugar food, the takeaways opening in every town happened at about that time, late 70s, early 80s. So we've just continued on, and we're now, by 2030, going to be the fattest country in Europe, if the World Health Organization is correct. The biggest people we have coming to the obesity clinic here are the people who were allowed to put their weight on under the age of 5. And we now have 25% of our 3-year-olds who are either overweight or obese. An overweight or obese child becomes inevitably almost an overweight or significantly obese adult.
Does obesity bring on other diseases?
Obesity, we now know, causes every disease and makes every disease it causes worse.
So then this is a massive burden. How is our healthcare system coping with this huge problem?
Well, we're not coping. We are unable to see people with type 2 diabetes frequently enough. And if we have a third of our population with type 2 diabetes by 2050, which is what's predicted, then we're already not coping at figures way less than that.
What can we actually do to reduce this? There has to be something that we can do to actively reduce the obesity epidemic at the moment.
We have to make cycling to school, walking to school, active transport to work a reality. It is in other European countries increasingly. The Netherlands and Finland are really good at this. We are really bad at this. 5 times more secondary school girls drive themselves to school than cycle to school in this country. I mean, the cause of obesity now, we know, is about 70 to 80% environmental and about 20% personal responsibility. So we have to educate people to take personal responsibility, see the environment for the toxic, obesogenic environment it is. You've got to do both, and doing both is going to involve a multi-component kind of intervention from our policymakers.
I'm interested in being part of a generation and a profession that shifts our emphasis back to protecting public health by protecting the environment. While part of the solution to obesity is exercise and active travel, it's hard to do this in an environment that prioritizes the car. Politicians, town planners, architects, engineers, and doctors all need to work with our communities to instigate change.
Being physically active is one of the best things you can do for your health, and certainly green space and being active outdoors in green space is beneficial for physical activity, for general physical health, and also for mental health.
There must be economic benefits as well. Can you tell us a bit about those?
There are, and the World Health Organization has developed what's called a heat model. So it's an economic appraisal of walking and cycling interventions that can be applied. And one interesting example is in a city of 150,000 people, if everyone walked an extra 10 minutes a day, this could save 31 lives per year and up to €45 million.
How can we change people's mindset?
I think a mixture of interventions have to take place, you know, and these are kind of at the individual level. 61% of children, primary school children, are being driven to school, 25% walk. That is directly opposite to what most of their parents did. And I think a lot has to be done as well by local authorities and at government level at making the infrastructure safer and better and more convenient, that it's easier for children to get around, not just to walk to schools, but to walk to parks and to playgrounds and to the shops as well. Those kinds of changes, active travel, being outdoors more, are good for people's individual health, but they are also good for environment and good for sustainability as well.
It's been an eye-opening experience, and I've learned a lot. But the most important thing I'm taking away with me is that even though the environment can have an influence on us, we too can have an influence on our environment. Improving the infrastructure in our towns and cities and instigating policies that can protect our beautiful island will not only add years to our lives, but also life to our years.